They laughed at her jet before they ever saw her fly it. To every fast-mover pilot on that base, the plane she flew was a joke, slow, ugly, built like a flying tractor. They called her Callsign nothing more than a rumor. Then one radio call, in the middle of the worst 15 minutes of 4 men's lives, turned that joke into silence. This is the story of what happened when the slowest jet on the base became the only one that mattered. Hog flight is inbound, talk to me. Nothing in Captain Mara Voss's voice sounded like a woman flying 200 feet above a valley full of men trying to kill 4 Marines. Hog flight, Anchor 3, we are danger close, 30 meters from hostile fire, we need precision, not a wide pattern. Corporal Priya Anand's voice cracked under the sound of gunfire behind her. Copy, danger close. I have your smoke. Talk me on to the technical. For days earlier, nobody on this base would have trusted this woman to fly a supply run, let alone hold a jet steady inside a kill zone with 4 lives depending on her hands. For days earlier, she was just the quiet pilot nobody bothered to notice, walking off a cargo plane with a duffel bag and a file too thin to explain anything at all. To understand what happened in that valley, you have to go back to the morning she landed. The big cargo plane touched down at Kestrel Ridge Air Base a little after 4 in the morning. Its ramp opened slowly, and the air that rushed in smelled like dust, diesel fuel, and the kind of staleness that only comes from a base that had been hit twice that month and repaired both times. Kestrel Ridge sat in a valley nobody back home could say the name of correctly on the first try. It was a joint base that held 2 very different kinds of pilots, and everybody there thought they already knew which kind mattered more. Captain Mara Voss walked down the ramp with one duffel bag over her shoulder and a flight case in her other hand. Nobody looked twice at her. That was, in its own way, exactly what she wanted. The base belonged, at least in spirit, to the 41st Fighter Squadron, Callsign Longbow. They flew F-35 jets that could hit 600 knots before most people finished breakfast, and they carried themselves like it. For 2 deployments in a row, this base had basically belonged to them. Off to the side, half hidden behind some maintenance shacks, sat 4 A-10 Thunderbolt jets, painted dirt brown, with 2 engines mounted high on the tail in a shape that looked wrong on purpose. The Air Force had tried to retire this jet for 15 years. The ground troops kept refusing to let them. Voss's orders sent her to fly the Thunderbolts. Nobody explained why a captain with a thin, quiet file had been sent to fly what most pilots on that base considered the least exciting job in the entire military, and Voss didn't offer an explanation either. She signed in, found her room, and by 6 that morning she was already in the hangar, walking around the jet she'd fly for the next 6 months like she was greeting an old friend. You lost. The voice belonged to Captain Derek Whitfield, Callsign Blaze, one of Longbow's flight leads and, in his own mind, the best pilot on the ridge. He leaned against a truck with the easy confidence of a man who had never once been told no. Fast jets are that way. He pointed toward the F-35s without even turning his head. I know where the fast jets are, Voss said, and kept walking. Then you know where you're not going. Whitfield fell into step beside her, grinning at his friends, who had wandered over to watch. No offense, Captain, but usually they send the Hog pilots in with a little more warning. A marching band. A moment of silence. A few of his pilots laughed. What did you do to end up flying a lawnmower with missiles bolted on? Voss stopped at the door of the operations building, set down her bag, and looked at him just long enough to decide he wasn't worth answering. I asked for it, she said, and walked inside. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't, because Whitfield told the story that night in the mess hall, making it a little bigger every time he told it, and by morning half the base believed the new A-10 pilot was either a punishment case, a burned-out pilot riding out her last years, or, the version that got the most laughs, someone who had failed her fast jet training so badly the Air Force had quietly moved her to the slow jets before she got herself killed. None of it was true. None of it seemed to bother her either. She flew her first 3 missions at Kestrel Ridge the same way she flew everything, low, slow, and calm, and so precise that the base's maintenance chief, a tough old master sergeant named Odom who had worked on A-10s through 3 different wars, started watching her land with something close to respect. "She flies that jet like she's walking it," Odom told his crew one evening, wiping his hands on a rag that had stopped being clean years ago. "Not one wasted move. You know how many pilots I've seen fly like that in 30 years? 2. She's the second one." "Who was the first?" a young mechanic asked. Odom didn't answer right away. He kept wiping the same wrench, turning it over more times than it needed. "Someone I used to work with," he said finally. "Long time ago. Different war." He set the wrench down and didn't say anything else, and the young mechanic learned, the way most people at Kestrel Ridge eventually learned, that some questions only get answered when someone decides it's time. Lieutenant Tomas Delgado, the squadron's newest A-10 pilot, only 2 years out of flight school, caught Voss in the ready room on her second day. He was still young enough to ask the questions everyone else had learned to leave alone. "They say you turned down a fast jet slot," he said. "I asked for the Hog," Voss said, not looking up from her checklist. "Why? Everyone wants the fast jets. That's where the kills are. That's where the stories come from." Voss looked up at him then, and something in her face made him wish he'd asked it differently. "The fast jets get the stories," she said. "The slow ones get the survivors. I decided a while back I'd rather have that." She didn't explain further. Delgado didn't push. But he filed the answer away, the way you file away something you don't fully understand yet but know you will one day. Over the next 2 days, the mockery didn't stop, but it changed shape. It stopped being loud and became something quieter, the kind of joke people tell each other in passing without really thinking about it anymore. Voss ate alone at the edge of the mess hall. She ran her checklists twice, every time, the same slow way. She spoke to almost nobody unless they spoke to her first, and when they did, her answers were short but never rude. Some of the younger pilots started calling her the ghost behind her back, not because they suspected anything, but because she was easy to forget was even on the base at all. Odom noticed things the others didn't. He noticed she never flew a training sortie without checking her cannon rounds by hand, even though the loading crew always double-checked them first. He noticed she kept a small folded photograph in the pocket of her flight suit that she touched, briefly, every single time before she climbed the ladder. He never asked what was in it. Some things, at a base like Kestrel Ridge, you learn to let people carry quietly. The call came in on the 4th day, a little after 11 in the morning, and it went wrong from the start. A 4-man Marine team, Callsign Anchor, had been dropped before dawn to watch a suspected weapons site in a narrow valley 11 miles north of the base. It was supposed to be a quiet job, the kind that gets written up in a report and forgotten. By 10:50, it had turned into something else entirely. Anchor had walked straight into a planned ambush. Now 4 Marines were pinned down in a rock fold on one side of a dry riverbed, with an enemy machine gun holding the high ground across from them and a dozen fighters closing in from the slopes. "Kestrel Ridge, this is Anchor 3, we are danger close and taking fire, requesting immediate air support, over." The message came through in broken pieces, cut by static and gunfire. The Marine on the radio, Corporal Priya Anand, only 23 and until 11 minutes ago having a fairly normal deployment, kept her voice as steady as she could, even though nothing else around her was steady at all. Lieutenant Colonel Grace Okafor, the base's senior air officer, didn't wait. "Scramble longbow flight, 2 jets, right now." Whitfield and his wingmen were in the air in under 6 minutes, which for a squadron that had mostly flown training runs that deployment was fast. They reached the valley 9 minutes later, flying at 450 knots, and ran straight into a problem nobody in the operations room had fully thought through. "Anchor 3, Longbow 1, we see the area on our sensors, working it now," Whitfield said, banking his jet into a wide turn above the valley. Below him, the ground was a mess of ridges and shadow, and the enemy positions were tucked into rock that gave almost nothing back to a sensor moving that fast, that high. "Say again the target's location, we're not getting a clear picture." Longbow, Anchor 3, hostiles are danger close, 30 meters from my position, technical with a heavy machine gun is the priority, we need it gone now. Anand's voice had gone tight and fast. A burst of gunfire hammered through behind her words. Whitfield made a pass, screaming across the valley at 400 knots, with barely 3 seconds of real look time before the mountains forced him to climb and turn for another try. He came off the pass having seen rock, shadow, and one flash of movement he couldn't call friendly or enemy. Anchor, Longbow 1, negative on positive ID, need another lower pass, coming back around. The problem wasn't courage. It was math. A jet moving that fast at that height needed almost 2 miles just to turn around for another look, and every one of those turns burned 90 seconds Anchor 3 didn't have. Whitfield made 3 passes in 11 minutes and never once got a clear look at the gun that was, by then, firing rounds within 10 meters of Corporal Anand. Longbow, this isn't working, Anand said, and for the first time her voice cracked, just once. You're too fast for this ground, I can't give you a clean target before you're already gone. I need someone who can stay over this valley long enough to actually see what I'm seeing. In the operations room, Okafor stood with her arms crossed, watching the situation get worse on a screen that couldn't tell her the one thing she needed to know, whether 4 Marines would still be alive in 20 minutes. Whitfield's voice came through again, the confidence gone out of it now. Send me someone with rockets, I'll try a wider pattern. Negative, Okafor said, not into the radio, but to the room. He doesn't have the time to hang around and he knows it. She turned to her operations officer. What's the Hog status? 2 jets ready on the strip, ma'am. Voss and Delgado. Okafor didn't blink. Get them up. Near the door, a young intelligence sergeant who had been listening to the whole thing leaned toward a coworker and made a joke about sending the lawnmower crew to save the day. He might have found it funnier if Odom, standing nearby with a headset around his neck, hadn't turned and looked at him in a way that killed the laugh before it fully left his mouth. The pilots in the ready room had heard the whole exchange, and when the order came through to scramble, more than a few faces turned toward the door with the kind of doubt that gets people killed slower than bullets do. Whitfield's own wingman, still in the air, said something over a private channel that Odom would later refuse to repeat in front of Voss. Voss didn't say anything. She was already moving, pulling on her flight gear, walking fast toward the flight line with Delgado jogging to keep up beside her. You good? Delgado asked. His hands weren't quite steady, and he knew it. You're going to be fine, Voss said. Fly your jet. Trust your warnings, trust me on the radio, and we bring all 4 of those Marines home. That's the whole plan. Nothing complicated. This is my first real firefight, Delgado admitted, the words coming out faster than he meant. I know. Voss didn't slow down. Everyone's first one feels like the whole world is sitting on your stick hand. It isn't. It's sitting on whether you do your job and let me do mine. So do your job. Odom met her at the jet, already checking the last few things, the gun loaded, missiles ready on the wing. Cannons hot, 400 rounds ready, he said. Then, quieter, just for her, go do the thing you do. She climbed the ladder without answering, but the set of her shoulders told him she'd heard it exactly the way he meant it. The 2 Thunderbolts left the runway at 11:32, and if anyone had been watching from the tower, they would have seen something the base hadn't seen all deployment, an A-10 pilot flying the takeoff like she'd done it 10,000 times before, which, though nobody on that base knew it yet, was close enough to true. They flew into the valley low and slow, the exact way the jet was built to hate being described and exactly the way it was built to fight. 200 feet up, 250 knots, engines droning instead of screaming, and for the first time in 20 minutes the picture on Corporal Anand's screen turned into something she could actually use. Anchor 3, Hog flight inbound, talk to me, Voss said. Her voice on the radio was flat and calm, almost casual, the kind of calm that either means someone has never seen real combat, or has seen so much of it that fear simply stopped showing up. Hog flight, Anchor 3, we are danger close, 30 meters from hostile fire, we need precision, not a wide pattern. Copy danger close, I have your smoke, Voss said, watching a thin line of purple smoke rise off the west wall of the valley. Talk me on to the technical. Technical is dug in at the base of the rock, you're 12 o'clock, 800 meters, it's got a heavy machine gun and it's the priority, everything else can wait. Voss rolled the jet into a shallow turn, and where Whitfield's jet had blown past the ground in seconds, hers seemed to hang in the air above it, taking in every detail at a speed a human eye could actually follow. Beside her, Delgado held higher up, watching for a mortar team on and had warned them about, his breathing loud in his own ears, forcing it slower the way Voss had told him to. I have the technical, Voss said. Cleared hot. Cleared hot, Hog 1, danger close, you are cleared hot. She didn't climb up for a bombing run. She flattened out the jet, dropped to 150 feet, and lined up exactly where she needed to be. The big cannon in the nose of the Thunderbolt was built for one job, and had been for 50 years, putting a wall of fire exactly where a pilot pointed it, close enough to friendly troops that most fast jet training manuals would call it too risky. Voss held the trigger for less than 2 seconds. The jet shook with the recoil of its own gun, a sound like the sky ripping along a seam, and the technical, along with everything within 15 meters of it, simply stopped existing. Splash, technical destroyed, she said, already pulling the jet up and around in a turn so tight that Delgado, watching from above, let out a breath that was half relief and half amazement. Hog 1, that's a good hit, that's a good hit, Anand's voice came back, and for the first time in half an hour there was something in it besides fear. We still have fighters moving on the east slope, request another pass. Copy, coming back around. Delgado, hold high, watch that mortar team for me. Holding, Delgado said, and meant it more steadily than anything he'd said in the last 20 minutes. For the next 19 minutes, Voss flew a pattern no fast jet pilot on that base could have flown, low and tight over a valley full of men trying to kill 4 Marines, small arms fire bouncing off the heavy armor built into the belly of her jet for exactly this reason, making gun run after gun run at a speed slow enough that she could actually tell the difference between a rock and a rifle. She walked on and through target after target with a calm that started to feel, to the young corporal pressed into the rocks below, like the only steady thing left in the world. At one point, Delgado's voice broke in, tighter than before. Voss, movement on the far slope, could be the mortar team resetting, I don't have a clean shot from up here. Copy, drop down to my level, come in from the north, I'll cover your break. Voss's voice never changed speed, never sped up, and something about hearing that same calm turn toward him instead of only the Marines on the ground made Delgado's hands finally stop shaking. He dropped his jet down into the valley beside her, found the mortar team setting up in a shallow dip in the ground, and put 2 rounds from his own gun exactly where they needed to go. Good hits, Delgado, Voss said. That's your first one. Won't be your last. Hog 1, good hits, you're clearing them off the slope, Anand radioed, breathless, half a laugh buried under the fear. Where did they find you? Voss didn't get the chance to answer. A warning light flashed red across her dash, sharp and sudden, and the jet lurched hard to the left before she pulled it level again. Taking fire, she said, her voice still flat, still even as she fought the stick. A round had caught her left wing near the tip, tearing a jagged hole through the metal and clipping a fuel line close enough that a thin trail of vapor began streaming out behind her. Hog 1, are you hit? Say your status, Delgado's voice came through fast, the calm he'd borrowed from her cracking for just a second. I'm hit, I'm flying, Voss said. Fuel lines damaged, not gone. I've got maybe 8 minutes before this gets serious. Anchor 3, where's my extract bird? 90 seconds out, Hog 1, 90 seconds. Copy. I'm not leaving until it's on the ground. Voss banked the wounded jet back into the fight, ignoring the fuel gauge ticking down faster than it should have, ignoring the ache building in her shoulder from wrestling a jet that wanted to pull left with every turn. She lined up one more pass on a cluster of fighters working their way down a gully toward Anand's position and put the gun on them the same way she'd put it on everything else that day, close, controlled, and final. Splash, gully clear, she said. Delgado, cover the ridge, I'm bringing this one home before it decides to make the decision for me. Copy, covering, Delgado said, and there was nothing in his voice now but steel. Down in the rocks, Anand watched the smoke trailing off Vasa's wing and understood, in a way she wouldn't be able to explain properly for years, exactly what kind of pilot stayed on station after taking a hit like that instead of turning for home the second the warning light came on. Hog 1, you're bleeding fuel, get out of here, we can hold. You can hold for 90 more seconds, boss said. I can give you 90 more seconds. That's the trade. Don't waste it arguing with me. She was watching her fuel and her ammo count, doing the quiet math every A-10 pilot does on a mission like this, how much longer she could stay before she had to turn for home. Anchor 3, I've got maybe 10 more minutes before I need to think about fuel. Talk to me about your way out. Working on it, Hog 1, we've got wounded, we need an extract bird. Copy, I'll hold as long as I can. It was somewhere in that exchange, nothing dramatic, just a call sign spoken twice in the space of a minute, that Corporal Anand went quiet on the radio for 3 full seconds. Long enough that Voss checked the line was still working. Anchor 3, you still there? Hog 1, say your call sign again. Anand's voice had changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something closer to disbelief. Hog 1 is my flight call sign for today, Voss said, still scanning the ground, half her mind still on the fight. My personal call sign is Scalpel. There was another pause, shorter this time, and when Anand spoke again her voice had dropped low, quiet even through the static, the kind of quiet that happens when a story someone was told years ago suddenly lines up right in front of them. Scalpel, she repeated. Ma'am, were you flying over Callsign Pass 3 years ago? Second recon, a company got trapped in a dry riverbed during the spring fighting. There's a story every new radio operator hears in training. About a hog pilot who stayed over a trapped platoon for almost an hour, running low on fuel because the rescue kept getting delayed, and put fire so close and so tight the company sergeant swore he could have shaved with it. Nobody ever got a name. Just a call sign. Voss was quiet for a moment, the jet turning gently through its slow circle, the valley below scarred with smoke and dust. That was a long time ago, Anchor 3. That was my brother's unit, Anand said. There was nothing dramatic about the silence that followed. No music swelling, no gasp in a crowded room, because there was no crowded room, just a corporal pressed against rock with 3 wounded men beside her, and a pilot circling 200 feet above, both of them quietly caught off guard by what had just lined up between them. He's a staff sergeant now, Anand said finally, her voice thick. He teaches at the training school. He tells that story maybe twice a year. He never says the pilot's name, because he never had one. Tell him Scalpel says he still owes me a coffee, Boss said, and there was the smallest crack of warmth in her voice, the first real feeling she'd let slip in the whole mission. Now let's get your team home, and you can thank me properly by not getting shot in the next 10 minutes. Copy that, Hog 1. Anand actually laughed, a short, tired, disbelieving sound. Copy that. The rescue helicopter came in 8 minutes later, covered by fire from both Thunderbolts, and by the time Anchor 3's 4 Marines, 2 of them wounded, all of them alive, were pulled off that ridge. Voss had flown 11 gun runs and Delgado had flown 3 of his own. Both jets landed with fuel gauges low enough that the ground crews started counting minutes on their own watches without being told to. Back at Kestrel Ridge, the operations room had gone quiet in a way that had nothing to do with worry and everything to do with the kind of quiet that follows people watching something they don't yet have words for. Okafor had heard the entire exchange over the radio, including the part about Callsign Pass, and she wasn't usually a woman who showed much on her face. She allowed herself one long breath before turning to her operations officer. Pull the report on the Callsign Pass rescue. 3 years back, spring fighting, 2nd recon. Already looking, ma'am. A pause. That file's sealed above my clearance. Okafor didn't look surprised. It usually is. Some things stay quiet on purpose. Doesn't mean they're not true. Voss brought her damaged jet in on fumes, the fuel warning light glowing steady the entire final approach, and set it down on the runway with a landing so smooth that nobody watching would have guessed she'd spent the last stretch of the flight fighting a stick that kept trying to pull left. The fire trucks that had rolled out as a precaution stood down the moment her wheels touched pavement and stayed straight. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft the second it stopped, and one of the younger mechanics let out a low whistle at the size of the hole torn through her left wing. Half an inch further in, the mechanic said, running a gloved hand along the jagged metal, and you'd have lost that fuel line completely. I know, Voss said, already unbuckling. That's why I didn't let it get half an inch further in. Whitfield was on the tarmac when the two Thunderbolts taxied in, standing a little apart from the small crowd of mechanics and off-duty pilots who had already gathered, because word travels fast on a base like that, fast, and a little wrong at first, then corrected, then repeated until it's close enough to true. He told himself later he'd just been walking by. Voss climbed down from her cockpit slowly, the specific kind of tired that comes from holding a jet inside danger for the better part of an hour, her flight suit dark with sweat even in the cold air. Odom was already there, running a hand along the gun barrels like he was checking on an old friend, muttering something about the pile of empty shell casings scattered on the ramp. A few feet away, Delgado climbed down too, walking the same slow, heavy-legged walk, grinning at nothing in particular, the grin of a man who had just learned he could do the job he trained for. Whitfield crossed the tarmac and stopped a few feet from her, hands in his pockets. For a long moment, he didn't say anything at all. Voss let him take his time. She wasn't going to make it easier. I flew 3 passes over that valley, he said finally, and I never got a clean shot. Not because I'm a bad pilot. Because that's not the kind of fight my jet is built for. He looked past her, at the Thunderbolt's scarred nose, the gun that had done the real work. I called it a lawnmower. You did, Voss agreed. I was wrong. You were, she said, without much heat behind it, because there wasn't much point being angry about something that had already been settled by 4 Marines walking off a helicopter under their own power. It's not fast. It's not built to be. Fast wins the fights you can see coming. Slow wins the ones you can't. Whitfield nodded slowly, the kind of nod that costs a man something to give. For what it's worth, Anchor 3's radio operator hasn't stopped talking about you since you landed. Something about a call sign. Scalpel, Voss said. She started walking toward the operations building, and after a beat, Whitfield fell into step beside her, not in front this time, not blocking the door. Just walking. You'll hear the whole story eventually. Everyone does, sooner or later. I'd rather you hear it from someone who was actually there than whatever version's already going around the mess hall. He almost smiled. Fair enough, Captain. Behind them, Delgado caught up, still slightly out of breath. Voss, that mortar team. That was my first real kill. I didn't even think about it, I just did what you told me. That's the job, Voss said. You'll think about it plenty tonight. Everybody does, the first time. That's normal. It means you're paying attention. News of the mission spread through Kestrel Ridge faster than any official report could move. By dinner, the mess hall was full of pilots trading versions of the story, most of them slightly wrong, all of them respectful in a way nothing about Voss had been treated with 4 days earlier. A few of Whitfield's own pilots asked him quietly if the rumors about the call sign were true. He told them the same thing he told himself walking away from that tarmac, that he didn't know the whole story yet, and he wasn't in a hurry to guess at it before she was ready to tell it. That evening, Corporal Priya Anand sat on a supply crate outside the base clinic, where her 2 wounded teammates were being treated before being flown out, a satellite phone pressed to her ear, waiting through the long delay of a call routed halfway around the world. When her brother finally picked up, groggy and confused by the hour, she didn't waste time. I found her, Anand said. The pilot from Kesson Pass. I found her. There was a long pause on the other end, the kind that comes from a man sitting up fast in the dark, suddenly wide awake. You're sure? She's flying out of the same base I'm working with now. Callsign scalpel. She remembered it. She remembered the rescue, the riverbed, all of it. Anand's voice shook just a little. She saved my team today the exact same way she saved yours 3 years ago. Low, slow, danger close, and she didn't leave until we were out. Her brother didn't speak for a moment. When he finally did, his voice had the rough edge of a man trying not to let his sister hear him get emotional over a phone line from 6,000 miles away. Tell her I still owe her that coffee. I told every class I ever taught that story. Never thought I'd actually get to say it to her. I already told her, Anand said. She said the exact same thing back. Voss never heard that phone call, and she probably wouldn't have made much of it if she had. She wasn't the kind of pilot who needed her own story repeated back to her to know the job had been done right. She spent that evening the way she spent most evenings after a mission like that, sitting on the wing of her jet with a cup of bad coffee, watching the sun go down over a ridge that didn't care what anyone called her, running the numbers in her head the way pilots do, checking and rechecking a math that always came out the same. 4 Marines home. 2 jets home. Nobody left on that hillside. Odom found her there, like he usually did, and set a second cup down on the wing without being asked. Word's already halfway around the base, he said. By breakfast, they'll have you flying that valley on one engine with your eyes closed. Let them talk, Voss said. Doesn't change what happened. Doesn't change what happens next time either. No, Odom agreed. It doesn't. He looked out at the darkening ridge, the same look he'd worn the day the young mechanic asked who the first pilot like her had been. You know, some of these fast jet kids, they think the whole war gets won at 400 knots. Takes them a while to learn it doesn't. Some of them never learn it at all. Whitfield's learning, Voss said. Whitfield got a head start most people don't get, Odom said. He got to watch it happen instead of just hearing about it after. He picked up his own coffee, turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, Captain, the jet doesn't win the fight. It never has. But it's a lot easier to fight the fight that actually matters when you're not too busy proving how fast you can fly past it. Voss didn't answer that directly. She just watched the sun finish going down over Kestrel Ridge, the Thunderbolt beside her still ticking softly as its engines cooled, and let herself believe, for the first time since she'd walked off that cargo plane with a duffel bag nobody bothered to notice, that at this base, at least, the jet she flew wouldn't need explaining anymore. 3 days later, a small package arrived at the base mail room addressed simply to Scalpel, A-10 Squadron, Kestrel Ridge. Inside was a bag of real coffee, the good kind, not the base's usual burnt supply, along with a short handwritten note. You said I owe you a coffee. Figured I'd start paying it back the only way I could from 6,000 miles out. My sister tells me you're still doing exactly what you did for us. Some things don't change. Neither did my thanks. S. Voss read the note twice, then folded it and put it in her flight case, where it would stay for the rest of the deployment, tucked next to a checklist she read every single morning before she climbed into a jet everyone else on that base had once laughed at. She never told anyone about the note. She didn't need to. By then, the story had already made its way around Kestrel Ridge on its own, growing a little with every telling the way stories do, until even the pilots who hadn't been there could recite the call sign like they'd heard it with their own ears over the radio. Weeks later, when a new group of pilots rotated into the base, one of the first things a maintenance crewman told them, without being asked, was to never make a joke about the slow jets parked at the far end of the flight line. When one of the new pilots laughed and asked why, the crewman just pointed toward a scarred old jet with a fresh coat of paint on its nose and said, because the last person who said that out loud had to eat those words in front of the whole squadron. Ask around. Somebody will tell you the story. They still called her jet slow. Nobody meant it as a joke anymore. The next morning, Voss walked into the ready room for the daily briefing the same way she'd walked in on her very first day, quiet, unhurried, carrying her own coffee because she still didn't trust the pot in the corner. But the room was different this time. A few pilots nodded to her as she passed. One of Whitfield's wingmen actually stood up long enough to pull out the chair next to his own and gesture for her to sit, which she did, without making a thing of it either way. Whitfield was already there, going over the morning's tasking with Okafor. When he saw Voss come in, he didn't make a joke. He simply said, "Morning, Captain," the same way he'd say it to anyone else on that flight line, and went back to his notes. It wasn't a parade. Nobody made a speech. That wasn't the kind of respect this base traded in, and it wasn't the kind Voss would have wanted anyway. It was smaller than that, and it mattered more for being small: a chair pulled out, a joke that didn't get made, a call sign said out loud without anyone needing to ask what it meant anymore. Delgado dropped into the seat on her other side, still looking like a man who hadn't quite come down from the day before. "Hey," he said. "You think we'll get tasked out that way again? Danger close, all of it?" "Probably," Voss said. "That's the job. Somebody has to be the one who can stay." Delgado nodded slowly, like he was turning that over and deciding he could live with it. "Good," he said. "I want to be that somebody too, someday." Voss looked at him for a moment, then allowed herself the smallest trace of something that, on anyone else's face, might have been called a smile. "You already are," she said. "You just don't know it yet. If this story kept you locked in until the very last radio call, remember this: the loudest jet in the sky isn't always the one that saves the day. Sometimes it's the slow one, circling low, waiting for the moment its name finally means something to the person who needed it most.